Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the Science of Self. Today we have a guest with us, Mark Connor from St. Paul, Minnesota. And Mark, as is usually the case, I'm going to ask you to take the first few minutes and introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, hi. As you said, my name is Mark Connor from St. Paul, Minnesota. I am a literary pugilist. And when I say literary pugilist, that means the only two things I've been good at in my life are boxing and writing. So I'm no longer a competitive boxer. I'm a boxing trainer and I'm a writer. And I have a book that we're going to talk about. It's called It's About Time, Millions of Copies Sold for Dad, published June 16th for Father's Day last year. It won the Irish Network Minnesota Bloomsday Literary Award, and it's a finalist in the Midwest Book Awards, which will be announced on June 28th in the religion/philosophy category. And it's described as a saga wrapped around a package of poems guarded by angels. So it's a short autobiography that reads like a novel, and it has 20 poems running through it. It deals with my life, my relationship with my dad. I wrote it in response to losing him on September 30th of 2019. I didn't actually write it until early 2021. Between early February and 29th of March is when I finished it. I juxtapose my experiences with my Catholic faith growing up. Talk a little bit about the Irish heritage influence on myself and on the city of St. Paul, where I live, where I grew up. And I talk about my experience with the Native American Indian community. I worked 13 and a half years at a place called Young, which means our home in Ojibwe. Really spent a lot of time in the spiritual tradition of the Lakotas and sort of kind of leaned that way for a while, but never abandoned my Catholic faith and kind of had a re-embracement of my faith back around 2007. So I talk about that and the influence of it and kind of a re-embracing of my faith and a reinforcement of my faith as I deal with losing my dad and letting go of him. That's what the book is about. One of the things we cut corners quite a bit on preserving ourselves for activity outside of marriage. I make a mention at a certain point in the book that I started I started to go back and not to follow all the rules that I grew up with as a Catholic of what I'm supposed to do. Go and make it to mass every Sunday, and just basically keeping the commandments, you know. And I think that I also tried to kind of blend things with because we have this kind of feeling in American culture of, you know, if we live our faith fully to how we're supposed to, we don't want to offend others by it. We don't want to try to be forcing others to be following the same thing that we follow. And so sometimes we might not bear witness publicly to what our behaviors are supposed to be, or we may make excuses for others. And you can accept someone who doesn't believe the same thing that you believe or behave the same way you behave, but not necessarily endorse the behavior or endorse the way of life. I was deeply immersed in the Native American Indian community at the time, and I wasn't announcing to people I'm re-embracing my Catholic faith. But what I really love and respect about my friends in the Native community is no one was trying to pull me out of that or discourage me from that. And no one was trying to push me to go to the sweat lodges or to pray the way that traditional Native American Indians prayed. But if I prayed with them in that tradition, it was accepted. The fact that I was respecting them. And that was the cool thing about it. People will say openly to me, yeah, the Catholic Church is just a cult, right? But when I didn't go to Mass, there was no one knocking on my door saying, trying to pull me to Mass. You know what I mean? And why weren't you there on Sunday? There was no one trying to rope me and say, you can't leave. You know what I'm saying? And that's really, when you talk about God, I mean, God is love. And God loves us eternally. And to love us, he must respect our freedom. If you don't respect someone's freedom, you don't love that person. So you can't force someone to do something. You have to make a free will choice to love God, to follow what God's will is. And so that's why neither tradition I'm talking about is a cult tradition at all. I mean, it is, or what we would call a cult, right?
You talk a lot about the Native Americans. How did you get involved with that?
In the early 1990s, I met this poet in his early 40s. His name is Kevin O'Rourke, and and I talked to him after this poetry, and he was telling me that he was sober and gotten in sobriety. And by the time he got in sobriety, he'd been brought to a Lakota Sundance ceremony down in Rosebud Reservation, and that he was involved with this Lakota tradition. And he said, if you ever want to come down there to see this or to be a part of this, come on down. And in the summer of 1995, I went down there with him, and that kind of, and at the same time also, I'd gotten involved with, and I mentioned here that I joined this Irish Catholic organization, Irish Catholic fraternal organization called the Ancient Order of Hibernians. I joined that right around the same time I'd gotten involved with, I'd met some people that were involved who were kind of grassroots activists involved with raising awareness about what was happening and advocating for the Irish Republican side of the conflict that was going on in Ireland at the time, the Troubles. And there was a solidarity that had been built up for over the last couple of centuries. There's been a solidarity built up between Irish Republicans and American Indians. And I mean, if you can go as far back as the Irish famine, when the Choctaw raised money by selling some gold to send over to Ireland to try to help feed people and everything. Then the following year, I met the guy who actually did the cover art for this book. His name's Eric Keese. He's a really good artist, Canadian Ojibwe. He got me the job at this place called Andayung. It's spelled 3 words. It's spelled Aindahyung. It's a temporary emergency. It's an American Indian program. It's a temporary emergency homeless shelter for youth aged 5 to 17. And it's for all youth, but the primary community it serves as the Native American Indian community. So I worked there in one capacity or another for about 13 and a half years. And what really made me comfortable about going to a Native American ceremony and witnessing it, but what made me comfortable about it was, one, there's kind of a fatherly understanding of God that the Lakota have. And there's also the recognition of the spirit, which is, like the word in Lakota for God is Tankashla Wakantanka, which means grandfather, great mystery. I believe it's going to get a pretty close interpretation in English. But also, just the whole idea of spirit or the great spirit is a parallel to me, or another understanding of the Holy Spirit. And also in the Sweat Lodge, one thing that I found very similar to Catholicism is the belief that the ancestors who would come into the Sweat Lodge when the prayers are happening, and listen to the prayers, and then at the end go back to the Creator. So they're bringing the prayers of the people back to God. But one of the sickest incongruencies of modern life is that people generally are more comfortable publicly sharing information about their sex lives than about their financial lives. They're either afraid people will think less of them for making too little money, or they'll try to exploit them or cause them trouble if they make too much money. They're ashamed to admit to striving for moral chastity, though. I told you at the beginning of the book that I'm Catholic, and I said that in 2007 I fully returned to the faith, began praying the rosary daily, and decided to avoid casual relationships. I started following the rules, all of them. So if the text of the poem portrays a greater or lesser degree of intimacy within its story, so long as you can critically prove it with quotes from the text, feel free to let your mind wander there. That's part of the achievement of universality in a well-written poem. Know with certainty, though, if you try to assign any autobiographical realities between me and the women about whom I wrote these poems, that it never happened with any of them. Especially since 2007, that has been my choice because I am a godfather to my niece and a confirmation sponsor to her and her brother, and that is the standard up to which I must live. If I fall, I must get back up. That's the standard required of any honest Catholic, as it is the standard of any honest Sundancer. It may seem strange to compare the honest Catholic to the honest Sundancer. The mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional elements are the 4 portions that comprise each human being. The medicine wheel, which represents in color, red, white, yellow, and black, all the people of the world, also represents each of these 4 elements. The circle is always turning, and one element or another may be the central experience of the moment, but they are all there all the time. One point of merger of difference and unity is the respect for family and the value of sex. Those who believe sex is meant for arbitrary enjoyment in the absence of commitment, who believe in polyamory, approve of, produce, distribute pornography, and or broker prostitution, do not value sex. No, those who value sex are those who confine it to the commitment of husband and wife who, making love, form family. If God ever grants me a wife, I'm perfectly comfortable going through every page of the comments so long as we're natural and open to life. Those who value sex never put a price on it because it cannot be bought or sold, because in fact, sex is not a commodity. Humans are not a commodity. We are priceless, and sex is a gift to be shared only in love that is never lustful because it is never selfish and is always selfless. Sex is sacred. A lot of times we think of freedom as being able to do whatever we want, but freedom is more being able to develop ourselves to the highest level that we can develop as human beings. And it takes discipline to do that. And it takes a certain amount of anchoring in. We have to have a perception of what we want and what we're going to do, and we have to have a structure to get ourselves into the routine of continuously doing it. Because once you take the first step, you start to build momentum. When you have momentum, you can keep things going, but you have to be able to have a focus on things to accomplish them. So that's the practice of boxing and the practice of writing. That's the similarity to the two of them in the approach that I have. It's the same principle applied in both endeavors.
One of the topics we frequent from the books that we present here is the concept of don't wait till you're motivated to do something. Doing something, getting started on something, as you said, taking that first step is the motivation. That's what gets you into the process, not waiting to feel like you need to do it or want to do it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I actually mention a writer when I'm talking about the different poems that appear through the book, named Natalie Goldberg, who wrote a really popular book about writing and specifically writing poetry, but creative writing in general, called Writing Down the Bones. She says, it's okay to say a swear word in this podcast. She says, the excuses that people have for not writing is, I write shit. And she says, well, so what then? Write shit. She said, every single great writer that you have ever encountered writes shit. You just never see it because th- over 75%, maybe even over 90% or more than that of what great writers put down on paper never sees the light of day. The garbage is thrown away because you have to have the momentum to get to the point where you write the great thing.
Great, fantastic. Thank you for joining us this week. Listeners, hope you'll leave some comments if you have any on the podcast, and thank you for joining us, and we'll see you all next week.